Didn't have that in the 18th century. So, welcome. Who here is everybody from New Hampshire? We have some Massachusetts people. Oh, we have a couple. So this may not, oh, no, you're here. You're living here.
Maine.
Oh, Maine, good. Yeah, but this may not apply to you. The law would be a little bit different. Everybody's over 16, right? Except this young gentleman. Welcome to the militia. Because you are in the militia, believe it or not. In the 18th century, the militia was any male 16 to 60. When they redid the state laws, they kept that rule, 16, but they took out the 60. So there's no age limit. Everybody, however old they are, has something that they can contribute. They also took out the men, so all the women are eligible. So if things really go south, the governor can draft any one of you to be part of the actual militia, which is now the National Guard. So we welcome you to the fold, and you can cook, sew, shoot. We got something for you. Fort William and Mary is very interesting, and the situation that occurs in 1774 is also very interesting. It has some long-term consequences. I have to give acknowledgments. I love to give acknowledgments. First is to Tom Kerr, who has only been studying this for 50 years. Probably the noted expert. John Weaver, my colleague from the Coast Defense Study Group, he helped contribute. And I saw point out Mike Janulis. Now, Mike Janulis is a transplant from New Jersey. We won't hold that against him. But he also got very interested in Fort William and Mary. And he wrote a poem, The Shot Not Heard Around the World. Because all of this occurs in late 74. 75, you meet the actual redcoats. But also, what happened at the fort would embarrass the British in Boston, embarrass, obviously, the governor, because a lot of treason was committed. That word just didn't get back to the king, by coincidence, I guess. So he wrote a book. Janulis wrote a book. It's a small book. It's available on Amazon. I'm not selling books, but it's the only one written. I haven't been able, in spite of all the times I've kicked him in the butt, to get Tom to write his book. So that's a pretty good introduction in the history of Fort William and Mary. It's worth buying. So what you see today for Fort William and Mary is not of this period. All of what applies to the 18th century is underground or washed away. Used to have a big water battery, all gone. Unfortunately, the rest of the fort may follow. It's in very, very bad condition. The brick used in the Civil War was very poor quality. The last big coastal storm they had did a lot of damage. So unless we can make good friends with Elon Musk, we may lose this. But there's a movement afoot to actually have it declared a national site. So I think that's very important. So this is a fragment of a 1779 map. And this is the Portsmouth area. But I'll point out that this is Great Island, is what it was called. Great Island. It is an island during this period. There are no bridges. And here's Portsmouth up here. So we were blessed with a very defensible position for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a tidal river. That means very high tides. You have to have help getting into port. You must have a pilot because there are lots of obstacles. And really, that's part of the defense. But the Piscataqua comes up like this. In this area, you have to be towed if you have a ship by rowboats. because you cannot tact in that area and compete with the, even if the water was still, you can't tact going around that area. You can't attack somebody in a ship that's being towed by rowboats. It's not to your advantage. So that was part of the natural defense of Portsmouth. In addition, there are lots of shallow areas, obstacles. They have pilots, just like you do today, to help guide you through the river. So if we look at it simplified, the red arrows show the path that it takes to get in there. And in the Narrows, this is the area you have to be towed. Now we're talking about Fort Point over here, where Fort William and Mary is. And there's other pieces of the puzzle you have to know. Jerry's Point enters into this a little bit. They used to have guns down in Jerry's Point very early on. Up here, after the siege of Fort William and Mary, which they did not re-fortify after the British took it over, partially disassembled it, they had 2 gun batteries, which covered this channel, and that made it impossible for you to get a ship up there if we didn't want it. My ancestor helped to construct that one, which is the Sullivan redoubt, and they didn't do anything with Fort William and Mary until following decades. So, Royal Engineers build the first. I'm not sure how I can stand with this and make sure everybody can see. 1631, they build the first redoubt up in the area called Fort Point, where William and Mary is. And they had 4 brass cannons, and which common at that time, so we're talking 17th century. And that was there for a while, then it was disassembled, all taken away. So you had some activity and then no activity, then activity again. So there's a lot of life in this place. 1666, the Royal Engineers show up again. They re-fortify with a more permanent fort. The original plan for the fort there was for 60 guns. That's a lot of artillery. It was the strongest fort north of New York. 1772, the engineers are back, and they're doing some more building. They never finished it so it could handle 60 guns, but they could handle quite a few. They put some bastions in, some barbettes to allow the guns to be swung around, all aimed easily. They were all this kind of cannon. Some probably were brass. Most probably were iron, ranging up to 32 pounds, 32-pound balls. Those are ship cannons. You can't carry those around anywhere. And that was important, and that's what we inherited. This is an example of what it looked like, a drawing as it was rebuilt in the 1669 period, named just after it was named for William and Mary when they were on the throne. They were mostly cannons, some on field carriages, like the one at the top. The cannon you saw previous was on a naval or fort carriage. You can't carry that around in the woods or the field. Later, Civil War, a lot of activity, 200-pound Parrott rifles there. But they never finished all the fort that was going to be there at the time. It was going to have a second level. It was going to have a big water battery. Never had any of that. Never saw any firing. In the end, for First World War and the beginning of Second World War, we had various types of field of artillery, including the disappearing guns, which were the main batteries for supporting Portsmouth. So the 6-pound howitzers, a range of about 1,500 yards. This has a range of, yes?
Was that at Fort William and Mary, or was that down the thing at the end of Wild Rose Lane that had a lot of...
Down towards Stark Park?
Yeah, Stark Park.
No, that Stock Park had two revetted 12-inch, really the naval rifles. They installed them. After you install it, you have to fire it once. They broke almost every window in Portsmouth and in Wentworth by the Sea. The mayor asked, please don't shoot these again unless you actually see some bad guys. And they never fired them again. But the disappearing guns, which come up over the parapet and then come back down after they fire, that's 14,000 yards, a little bit bigger, and a 600-pound, no, excuse me, 300, up to a 300-pound projectile. And in my knowledge, they never fired those either. So, we'll talk about the castle. We mean castle in the classical sense. Castle actually means any fortified location. And you say castle, most people think of a medieval castle, but that's not the actual meaning of the word. It's any fortified place, fortified any way that you want. You have the Union Jack of 1606. That is the king's colors. The fact that it's the king's colors is an important part of this puzzle that we're talking about. Portsmouth, you have a secure harbor, naturally secure harbor. You have the fort. You have the provincial arsenal. Now, that arsenal contains both crown material and provincial material. That difference is very important, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It has a garrison. This is militia that reports to Governor Wentworth, but the pay for these people is negotiated with the provincial council. He wanted a little larger garrison. They wouldn't give him the money. So what he's got one officer and 5 guys. That's all he's got. Throughout history, there's a lot of cases where you have a big fort, and the number of people that man the fort is, in fact, very small. And they only buck up the number of troops when there's a threat coming, assuming they see it in time. The king's colors, 18 by 24 feet. It's that big because the whole purpose, as seen in that little picture we showed, is you have to be able to see it by sea. This is for navigation of the captains of the ships. And it also shows where you actually are, under whose jurisdiction. There is a case later, after the Fort William and Mary siege, that a British ship carrying flour shows up off the coast, and they're looking actually for New York. I don't know where they are. At that time, the flag is gone. All of the defenses have moved north. And so they say, oh, yes, absolutely it is. And so they sail the ship in, and they take over the ship, and they steal the powder, and they send these guys off in a rowboat or something. Everybody needed the powder. A lot of games like that get paid in every army at any time. So, some advantages here in New Hampshire. New Hampshire does not have a charter. All of the government rests on the shoulders of the governor who's appointed by the king. In this case, it's Governor Wentworth. And another serious positive is there are no redcoats stationed in New Hampshire at all. And that's something you have to be very clear about. Massachusetts does not have that privilege. They're having problems with troops marching all over the place. We don't. It's a very secure port, as we talked about before. And New Hampshire overall, you had about 40% who favored the Patriot cause. So during this period, you're dealing with the rule of threes. 1/3 generally supported the Patriots. 1/3 were loyalists. Remember, you're going to lose a lot if you change government. And 1/3 said, a pox on both your houses, leave us alone. So this is not a activity, the revolution, where you have the majority handling. And that's a problem throughout the entire war. You had a small garrison at this fort, and you had some very effective leaders, John Langdon being one of the notable ones. But Fort McClary, anybody ever been down to Fort McClary? It's really in Maine. McClary was a lot like Dr. Warren. He could have been a serious contributor to the revolution had he not gotten killed at Bunker Hill. But he was part of the planning for this. So, 1774, the British are occupying Boston. You've had a lot of angst between the Tea Party, between the attempt to make sure that the king had total control, and the Intolerable Acts, now preceded by the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act affected everybody. So that was something that really the New Hampshire people were not satisfied with, as the Stamp Act. But with the Intolerable Acts, one of the things you got was the closing of the port of Boston. And remember, Boston is a key to New England. The King's missives dissolved the charter, and which closed the whole government of Massachusetts. Now you got General Gage, Governor General Gage, who's in charge. In September, you have the powder alarm, the first of the powder alarms. Gage is concerned about possible insurrection, so he decides on his own he's going to go out and take the powder out of the Somerville powder house, which he does. But there was a huge ruckus, a hue and cry about taking the provincial powder from the Boston residents, and he ends up putting it back. He isn't ready to sort of poke that too much. Now, the New Hampshire Provincial Assembly, which is withdrawn at this time by the governor. Governor terminates it. Another one meets just the same, except not reporting to the governor. They're increasingly radical, increasingly pro-patriot, and more interested in separation than the average person. In October of 1774, the king issues an order prohibiting the import of arms and ammunition to the colonies. General Gage interprets that as giving him a right to go seize all of the militia stores. So that's what he starts to do. And we get word of that. We're very concerned. We have a lot of powder in Fort William and Mary. And that's our powder as far as we're concerned. We charge a tariff. Everybody's heard of a tariff. We charge a tariff for every ship, foreign ship coming into Portsmouth. That includes them Bay Staters, them nutmeggers out of Connecticut, heaven forbid, some of the Canadians. Everybody pays. So what they're worried about, not just for defense, because that's not an immediate priority, you're going to steal our stuff. And we don't like that. That's really where it all starts. Now let's talk a little bit about Governor Wentworth. Governor Wentworth is a native, born in New Hampshire. He's not as corrupt as his uncle, who was the governor for a long period of time, Benning Wentworth. He really was well liked. He was good to the people. He was well liked. He still was a royal governor, had to do things that the king wanted him to do. But overall, he was pretty well thought of. He just is the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then we have John Langdon. John Langdon's pretty well known. He was very active in Portsmouth. He was a shipper. His brother was a shipper. He was in politics a lot. And he was noted for participating with the Committee of Safety that was formed to try to secure New Hampshire against incursions by the British forces. He was in the Friends of Liberty, which was New Hampshire's name for the Committee of Safety. We had our own name. And he appears all over the place, appears in politics after the war. Actually quite a colorful guy, very well known. His house is available to view in Portsmouth. Now I have John Sullivan. Now John Sullivan later becomes a general, but this time he's a major in the militia, and he's not ready to break with the crown. So he's a bit on the fence. He's still friends with all the folks. He's not as isolated himself, but he doesn't really think maybe that's a good idea. Later, as general in the Continental Army, we're going to see Major Sullivan later. People recognize this guy, Paul Revere. So Paul Revere obviously was a great propagandist. He was a great silversmith. He was a great engraver. He was a great several other things. He was a lousy military guy. However, he's noted mostly for his horse riding. He ends up riding to Portsmouth when they find out about the British coming up. We'll talk about that in a minute. Well, maybe we'll do it now. They got word, the committee of correspondence got word that the British are outfitting 2 ships to come up the coast. They didn't know whether they were going to land troops or they were going to just take the stores out of William and Mary. That's our stuff, the powder particularly. And so they send him with a message to come up to Portsmouth to say the regulars are coming, the British Navy is coming to do something with the fort. It's a bitterly cold winter. He rides all 66 miles at night to arrive early in the morning with a letter to the Committee of Safety correspondence about this. It's his only successful ride, fully successful ride for Lexington and Concord. He never made it to Concord. He gets captured just outside of Hanscom Air Force Base. So he does a good job on this ride. It's very interesting, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. I've got another document to show you. Then we have John Cochrane. John Cochrane is the commander of Fort William and Mary, Irish immigrant. He has his wife Sarah with him and two kids. He's very, very loyal to Governor Wentworth. Governor Wentworth is his boss, obviously. And so he's the defender. He's the guy caught in the middle. Other defenders, there are a few of them here: a Seavey, a Hall, a Rowell, Griffiths. A lot of Seaveys around in the Portsmouth area. One of the islands the other island that the naval base is built on is Seavey's Island. There really were only the most at any one time 7 people defending the fort. So the myth is that the soldiers were invalids. They were not invalids. They were perfectly functional. Forgot to bring in from the car. I have a cannonball that would fit with this description here. Now we have Henry Moat. Now, Henry is responsible for that map we looked at first with the green. He commands the Canso. The Canso is a hydrology ship. His job is surveying the New England coast. So he knows all the flying places. He's the one that determines those measurements that appear on the map, water depths, where sandbars are, that sort of thing. That's his profession. In addition, he's a revenue ship. So his job is also intercepting smugglers. We have lots of smugglers. Anybody here from Rhode Island? Home of the smugglers. Yeah, that was the profession in Rhode Island all the time. The Canso, Royal Navy sloop, has 8 9-pound cannon on it and some swivel guns. Swivel guns fire a half or full ounce ball. They're little small things about this big. And it's been in operation for a long time. Flies the Navy flag with the Cross of St. George and the Union Jack in the canton. Incidentally, the home port is in Kittery, on the Mass Bay or Main side of the river. So Admiral Graves has been ordered to enforce this blockade of arms and ammunition. And Wentworth is also, the frigate Scarborough has also arrived to be in the coast too. The frigate Scarborough is a bigger ship, more powerful. Governor Wentworth, actually, one of the positive things that he did is help keep British troops out of New Hampshire. So you would get deserters from all armies and navies of that period. And he would round up deserters and send them back into Massachusetts, into the Bay State. And in that way, he helped keep, there was no impetus to move troops out of Boston to look over New Hampshire, because he's cooperating with them. There are very few cases where we don't see deserters. I'll give you one. Later, towards the end of the war, when the British troops arrive for the Battle of Yorktown, half of the fleet is moored in Portsmouth. In fact, it increases the size of Portsmouth by 100%. They have to go 20 miles upstream to get water, forage for 300 miles to get food for this group. Every one of these ships has a priest, because they're all Catholic. No desertions. Anybody know why there wouldn't be any desertions? Because there was a French-speaking community in Portsmouth, but they were Huguenots. They were Protestants. And they all remember Louis XIV's massacre of the Huguenots on St. Bartholomew's Day. And if they had showed up in one of those, the French-speaking community, they'd have turned them in. They got no deserters. Very, very rare, very rare. So Rhode Island, we get word Rhode Island's already removed some of their coast defense. They moved it inland because they're concerned with that stuff being seized by the Crown. So Langdon advises the folks in Portsmouth, the Committee of Correspondence and Safety, that maybe we ought to take some of that out of the fort. Powder is worth more than gold. The king did not allow any powder mills in the colonies. So any powder you got had to be begged, borrowed, or stolen. And so having control of the powder is very, very important at this time. So they're working on play. They've been thinking about what would happen if we had to do something with Fort William and Mary. And they just have been talking about it. No solid plans, no mustering to prepare to do something. Till they're told they got maybe 48 hours, maybe a tops before the regulars show up to take whatever they can. Now you got to put together an operation very quickly, and one of the guys driving is John Langdon. He's encouraging them, helping plan. He goes on one of the raids. Then Paul Revere arrives with his message, and the message says you got less than 48 hours before the ships show up. Now you have a real problem. Remember, you're dealing with an island, and you're dealing with a tidal river with very strong tides. So you can only go in the direction the river is going. That governs how you plan things. And that's serious because you only got half a day to be in any one place. This is a fragmentary copy of the message that Paul Revere brought to Portsmouth. What would happen is he would bring the letter, and they would read the letter, then would turn the letter over, and they would write a note to a town. They'd copy the letter and write a note to the next town. The next town gets the letter, they turn it over and write their message on it. So this is a fragment of that message. The State Historical Society managed to get this for their collection, so that they haven't displayed it yet. They didn't display it on the 250th anniversary of Fort William and Mary, but not my job. We know he was there, and he was there for a week, because a number of years ago, a guy is settling his father's estate in California, and he finds an unusual piece of paper in his father's records. And he didn't know what to do with it, but he did know of Tom Kerr, and he called him. And this is a copy of what it is. It is Paul Revere's travel claim for his trip to Portsmouth. And it shows he was there for the entire raids. Now, he did not participate in the raids. He held down the tavern, kept it warm for the guys in the raids, and trust me, it was cold. Very lucky to get that. I don't know who has it. It went up for auction, but because of the arrangement, we actually got a copy of it, which we probably wouldn't have had otherwise. So, I was going to include a picture of me in December when I was down by Fort William and Mary, by the water. Took my left and see Fort William and Mary for a commemoration, a raid. Well, in this case, it's well below freezing. It is snowing. The wind blows all the time, and I haven't been that cold in a long time. And I'm there, the pan of the musket fills up with snow. It doesn't help to fire the salute. It made me think, these are tough guys who do this. This is all manual, and the weather is horrible. There's ice everywhere. You could fall down and break a leg or something. You got to hand it to them. This was very difficult physical work. Now, on Wednesday, it's actually warmer than it was when I was down there in December. It's 29 degrees in the morning. And then by the late afternoon, it's 31 degrees and snow. But remember, you're dealing with water. You're going to get wet. You're dealing with strong winds. You're going to have that. So it's not like it's a spring walk. The folks from Newcastle attempt to infiltrate the fort. Now, this fort, remember, is only guarded by 5 guys on duty, and they all know each other. So maybe could wheedle themselves in and talk them into helping to cooperate. Cochrane was not going to have any of that, but they tried very hard to talk their way into the fort. They had arguments. They had all kinds tried to sneak in. It didn't work, so they didn't have any success. So at noon, Langdon rallies the participants for the first of the raids. Raid number 1. It's an afternoon. Remember now, this is December, so you're not going to get much light. It's an afternoon exercise, probably because they're planning around the river. You know, they're limited by what the river wants to do. There's a myth that there was a lot of fighting, a lot of attacking. About 400 people, we think, were there for the first raid, and there were no shown weapons. There probably were, we know there were a few weapons, but there were no shots fired by our side. And that's not true of the fort. Now, there's no custom in Europe that you can have a ceremonial surrender. What you do is you fire a single shot in the air, so that's your sign of having resisted, and then you surrender, because if the resistance is so large you can't win, that's what you do. Cochrane did not do that. Cochrane had preloaded 3 4-pound cannons on the parapet. He also had loaded muskets for all of them. So what happened is they're all there yelling and screaming, and they're confronting the guards at the gate. Cochrane decides he's going to fire the cannons at the crowd. And it's serious business. Not expected, but it was serious business. So if you remember the cannon we saw first, the naval gun, that's how the cannons would have been mounted. And how those guns are fired, you have a linstock, which is a kind of stick. You have a slow match on it, which is usually rope soaked in saltpeter that glows like a cigarette. And you touch it to the vent on the cannon, and the cannon fires. Well, these guys all knew that. So they saw that they don't have staff to fire one at a time. They notice it's going to fire the cannon. The crowd opens up. The cannonball flies off away from the crowd. And that happens on each one of these cannons. One cannonball goes into a schooner that's coming into the harbor. One cannon crosses the river and goes into a guy's house. The other one ends up in the farmer's barn, so they didn't hit anybody. Then each fires their one shot from their musket. Now, at the distance, maybe luck, maybe not luck, nobody knows, but there are no injuries. And there's no return fire from the crowd. Now, the crowd does have, in some cases, cudgels. Everybody know what a cudgel is. The old term for a stick that you hit somebody with. Now the riot starts. And this is more riot in many respects than anything else. This is, unlike some of the things you read, there are a lot of errors in what's has been written. This is not a militia action. These are townspeople from Portsmouth. The nearest militia is in Exeter. That is the governor's quick reaction force. Best equipped, best manned, best commanded. So these are all folks from the Portsmouth area who are conducting this. And it's a hand-to-hand fighting, and the only injury recorded is that Cochrane stabs one guy in the arm with a bayonet. Otherwise, it's all melee till they overwhelm Cochrane and his folks. Now, we know some of the people. There's a list, a little less than 200. We know were actually there. My guy Fernald is on that list, but they were very well known, so you couldn't hide at that anyway. So, otherwise, we think over the two, we don't know who was on this raid, a lot of them, and we don't know on the next raid who most of them are. We figure over the really 2 days, that there may have been 1,000 guys participating in this, because it gets more complicated when you get away from the powder. And oddly enough, there is no sign-up sheet for treason, because nobody wants their name on this list if their side loses, because then you probably get a visit from somebody unpleasant. So there's no sign-up sheet. Also, it's clear there would have been injuries with people beating each other with sticks and everything else. No record. Nobody's going to go to the doctor of the day saying, well, what happened to you? Oh, I got hurt attacking Fort William and Mary. No, it was home medicine. They didn't do that. Now, there was one attempted shot. A guy by the name of Palmer attempts to shoot one of the guys in the head. He pulls out his pistol, fires it, does not go off. Now, we don't know if it was a feint, that he didn't have it loaded, and he's just scaring the guy. We don't know if it just malfunctioned. It's snowing. These things do not like snow, do not work well in snow or rain. Anyway, there was no injury from his pistol, which he had concealed. Meanwhile, his son and a few others are over at the flagpole. And what they're doing is hauling down the king's colors. Now that is genuine treason. The king might overlook stealing something, not the insult of hauling down the king's colors. That would get you the punishment for treason. Who knows what the punishment for treason is? Hanged, drawn, and quartered. One of my other ancestors is the only guy in the colonies that was ever sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. But then they instead sent him to have all expense paid vacation in the Tower of London. Then they threw him out of the Tower of London because he wasn't high enough in social standing. He'd led a revolt against Governor Cranfield in the 17th century, and he lived down in Hampton. I think when he came back, they locked him in a closet because he was a registered nut. So no extensive fighting. We know people hurt, but hauling down the King's colors, that was not. You couldn't survive that if they caught you. We took about 100 barrels of powder. They don't know exactly. The numbers vary. We don't know exactly how much. They left one barrel. Now, if they took all the powder, they also probably took some of the crown powder. You can't fire the cannons in the fort for nothing. So it's probably not clear, but doesn't make any difference in the end anyway. They deliver the powder to Major Sullivan. Now, Major Sullivan didn't want them doing this. And suddenly, here they come. Here is the powder. You know, it's all yours to manage. So he's stuck in the middle of it, whether he wants to be or not. The powder is dispersed. Some goes into Exeter. A whole bunch of it was under the podium of one of the local churches. So you could have a very hot sermon. But he ends up having to manage the powder and get it dispersed to other locations. Now they're sending messages to all the towns about what they've done, so that they can in fact prepare for any eventualities. Now, some towns were all Tory, particularly up north, but also a lot of Portsmouth because of business interests. And you had to be careful who you talked to, what you told them. Now, the governor had very upset with this, and he called on his quick reaction force, the Exeter militia. They changed sides. That's probably it's the most important factor. They changed sides. They didn't respond to the governor's call. They show up the next day to support the Patriots. And they're the best equipped militia. At that point, Governor Wentworth loses control of the military in the province. And that's the factual end for his leadership in the colonies. So the militia, I heard it the other day from a PhD from Dartmouth about the militia attacking the fort. The militia did not attack the fort. There was no militia in Portsmouth, and they were all townspeople. And there was no shot from the raiders, which was actually pretty unusual. But a lot of these people, they knew each other. This was a huge town, a city, Portsmouth, so they really didn't want to shoot each other if they didn't have to. But they wanted the powder anyway. Another night action with the outgoing town. Now, what the sources said, 70 to 100 men, that there had to be a lot more, because they decided to go back and get the cannon. Now, that wasn't part of the original deal. Sullivan didn't want them to do that either. But everybody's now fired up with the idealism. They want to go back and get some more out of the fort, and they have some small arms and things like that. Now you got to wait for the tide. You know you got a limited time period. The clock is running for the British ships coming up all during your first part of the raid. Now you got to do another raid. This time you're going to remove guns. Now they can't take most of the guns. Most of the guns are for ships that 24-pound, 32-pound cannon. Those kind of guns weigh close to 2 tons, the 32-pounders. You can't carry those around. But even the smaller 4-pound guns, which is what they wanted, it's 4-person carry to move one of those. So they're at least 500 pounds, usually more. We don't know exactly because, like the 6-pound cannons in the British service, they had 15 varieties of them. Different materials, different lengths, certified for different levels of powder. So we don't have that level of detail of what they had. They bring the gondolas in, and you see there's a gondola down in Portsmouth you can ride. They're shallow drafts specifically designed for the Portsmouth area. and they work very well. And they probably brought some other boats with them. There's a disagreement as to what's ours and what's the Crown's. So Sullivan's in arguing with Corcoran about what they might be able to take and get away with. But while he's talking to him, they're picking up everything that isn't tied down. So finally he sees that this is all unorganized. He goes out and takes charge of these folks. They take 15 4-pound cannons. Now what they want is cannons that can be moved. Cannons can be moved on the battlefield, and that's not going to be a 9-pounder or a 10-pounder for this period, so they're not going to take those cannons. So they pick up these cannons, and they have some field. They only had 10 carriages, so they'd have to have blacksmiths and carpenters make other carriages for them, but these are very important. Cannon is the biggest worry of Gage. Gage has thousands of troops who are used to tackling people with muskets. But Cannon changed the name of the game in favor of the people who have the artillery. Historically, artillery causes the most casualties. One of the reasons you have Lexington and Concord is because he's looking for 2 stolen cannons as well as other stores. They got stolen out of Boston, and he was very concerned, and that's one reason they're heading to Concord, because they thought those cannons would be there. That's part of the reason they were up there. They also took one 9-pound cannon, not a common caliber, but you had some older guns there too. This is after they standardized the artillery in the British service. Over 68 cannons remained. They couldn't do anything with them. They have neither the time nor the ability to move them. And at that point in the budding war, you might call it's not really a war yet, they couldn't move or couldn't use them anyway. So they were just as baggage. They managed to get away, but very close. The Canso arrives before they're finished, but it's out of the port. And by accident, the pilot runs the ship aground on something. Now, since the captain his job is doing the navigating and the surveying, he's probably suspicious, but we don't have any information about that. But that delays them a little bit. Some of these they're taking up to Great Bay, up towards Exeter. They're having to chop the ice to get the boat moving. This is the middle of winter in the period at the end of what's called the Little Ice Age. Very cold, very cold. So these guys are not being paid anything, but they're certainly earning what they're not being paid. So they've also took some 42 serviceable muskets, a few other things, canteens, stuff like that. But the important things were the cannons. And that was a lot of cannons for the period. It's also embarrassing that this happened. So Wentworth doesn't want to take credit for it. It's their fault. And General Gage doesn't really want to advertise to the king he's lost all this stuff. But that whole game changes in less than 6 months anyway, because you have Lexington and Concord. But it was a pretty big exercise. The Exeter arrived to guard him on the second raid. The Canso, we talked about that, and then the arrival of the Scarborough with it. So the governor no longer controls the militia. Everybody is declared to be in treason by all of the judge advocate generals in the Bass Bay Colony in New Hampshire. Nobody cares. He writes a broadside demanding their arrest so they can be tried. They don't go after anybody. They couldn't put together a jury anyway, so nothing happens there. Now, debates in the House of Commons. This is part of the interplay preceding the real revolution. You had a lot of people in England did not support the way the colonies were being treated. But the news of the capture of this fort did not make the king very happy. So he got a resolution approved by the Parliament to the troops here in New England should take whatever measures necessary to ensure obedience to the king. That doesn't work too well either. So what happens? What's the result of this? Governor Wentworth ends up in his house, and he has visitors, and he keeps making pronouncements, and nobody listens to him. But then things change in other areas in Boston, and they decide a lot of townspeople decide they don't want him there. So they roll a cannon up to his front door to help motivate him. Then somebody fires a shot through the window. Now, he's got a wife, he's got at least two young children. So they let him go, they move him over to Fort William and Mary. And he stays there till he's evacuated the following August to Boston and then to England. He never comes back, which is too bad in many respects. The Cochrans, they're loyalist refugees at the end. Cochrane goes on to have a very successful career in the Navy. The defenders were witnesses, then soldiers. They were taken imprisoned on the Scarborough because they were considered key witnesses. They were going to be grilled about everything that happened. I'm sure that was very nice. Langdon, again, he was a congressman, and Sullivan goes on to do great things in the Revolution for the Continental Army. Militarily, the Royal Navy removes all the cannons from the fort. That's with the Scarborough and the Canso had just arrived, and they have people and equipment to do that. There's also this Jerry's Point, which is at the other end of the island. There's some old cannons laying there, and we go down, we think, well, maybe we could move them. They're fairly large guns, older guns. They sent a group ashore to at least spike the guns, the British do, and try to get some provisions. Even while the ships were there was interplay providing provisions back and forth to the ships until they started to get some firing back. Some patriots started firing on them in the harbor, and so that didn't last too long. And that's what I'm talking about here with Pickering. They were shooting at this lighter from the Scarborough. And what's interesting, Pickering is a well-known guy too. Yeah, can find something when you want it. He invented a musket tool that was very commonly used during the war. And finally, no discussions at all with the British Navy, and they're getting ready to withdraw anyway. They pulled down some of the outer defenses, but Cochrane's wife is still there with the kids, living there. And even while such stuff is going on, she on her own is charging tariff for the boats or ships coming into the harbor, so you could write a whole book on her, her exploits at the fort and elsewhere during the period of revolution. She ends up in Canada. And this Jerry's Point, that's down here. And then you have the Fort Point up there. And you used to have a fort there all the way through the Second World War. Then no more official fort. Samuel Graves orders punishment for anybody who attacks British sailors or British troops is going to get punished. So he orders 9 towns on the East Coast to be burned. And right up there is Portsmouth. But then Governor Wentworth and Captain Cochrane, not Cochrane, other guy, they talked to they talk to the admiral, say, you know, you can't get there from here. You're going to get your butt kicked if you try to go up there. You cannot get within artillery range of Portsmouth because of the narrows and the two redoubts that we have built on both sides. This period, fortune favors the fixed guns. An example is the 1812 period. They built a Martello Tower on Fort William and Mary. Now that's just a big tower. It wasn't very tall when they actually built it on a hill. And that's named after the siege of Martello in Corsica, where one heavy gun mounted on a tower kept the whole British Navy out of the port. So that's another example of the advantages to the fixed guns at this period. That goes away when you get things like that disappearing gun, you know, can shoot 17 miles. But they found only one place they could easily burn, and that was Falmouth, which is now part of Portland. And he'd been in trouble in Portsmouth, in Falmouth before. Got locked up at one time, and there's a lot of antagonism between his ships and townspeople. So he was anxious to burn it. So they burned Falmouth. So of the 9 towns, that's the only town that got burned. So the Canso, with several other ships, are on that expedition, and they burned Falmouth. They use carcass shells, which are hollow shells, usually filled with pitch and other flammable materials, gunpowder, saltpeter, just sulfur. You fire those, set fires. That is the objective. That is the end, and this is at the end of the battle, and the government has fallen. The new assembly designs and establishes this as the first seal for New Hampshire. Before, the seal for New Hampshire was the King's seal, George III's seal. This is only for a little over a year when Congress gives us permission to form a state, at which time they start to develop the sail that you see today, which has the ship Raleigh, which was the very first made for the Navy ship that's on the seal.
So, yeah,